Good evening. It is Tuesday, July 28th. Tonight, the Guilford Public Schools is holding a public forum in order for you, the community, and parents of our students to ask questions about the school reopening plan. We have with us tonight Dr. Freeman, who is obviously our superintendent, Dr. Crystal, our Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum, and Mr. Bowden, our Assistant Superintendent of Operations. All three of them are here to, again, answer your questions on the school reopening plan and provide more detail to the extent that we have it at this point on this plan. I am going to turn it over to Dr. Freeman.
Thank you, Dr. Balistraci, and I'm looking and seeing that we've got well over 100 participants who are joining this conversation now, and the number keeps going up. So thank you to all of you who are joining us for this conversation. On Sunday night, we published to the community our plan for reopening, plan that is required by the state of Connecticut that we will now move forward and begin to use to develop individual schedules and procedures at each of our individual buildings. Last night with the Board of Education, Dr. Crystal and Mr. Bowden and I gave an overview of that plan that took up about 45 minutes of airtime for us to sort of generally walk through that plan. What I'd like to do is propose that we dispense with that overview tonight, but that we get right into the question and answer period. And those of you who are participating have the ability to enter questions that you would like to ask into the question and answer function. And I can see that those questions are beginning to queue up now. What we will do as the panel here this evening is draw questions from that list and try to respond to those questions as they come in. I think that we are planning what we anticipate to be approximately a 2-hour conversation. It's about 7 o'clock now. We plan on drawing questions from that queue until about 9 o'clock or until we exhaust that queue, whichever comes first, at which time this conversation will be archived on our website along with other recent Board of Education conversations. I will say that if you haven't had an opportunity to read the plan in its entirety, it does exist on our website. You can go to the Guilford Public Schools website, go to our news feed. It is the first item on the news feed, and you can go ahead and call that up and be able to refer to the plan as we go through tonight. Sort of the last introductory piece that I want to share, the last detail that I want to point out is that the plan itself, there's two important things to know about the plan. One is that it is a very high level, district level plan. This plan addresses concerns, addresses strategies and approaches at the district level. In fact, of the 47 pages in this plan, approximately 30 are checklists that individual principals and building level teams will be using to work on their individual opening detailed plans. Essentially, this plan needs to break down to be 7 individual plans. And within the plan, there is a continuum of 3 different phases. This plan speaks to our school presentation next year in 3 different conditions. One, a fully opened condition, a setting where we invite all students to return to school next year. And it's important to note, while in that condition we are open and inviting all students, parents and families have the option of choosing to keep their students home. So as we speak about the fully open option, it's important to note that individual families have the latitude to keep students out of school in that condition, and the district would be responsible for continuing to provide academic distance supports to your student. That would be through a combination of synchronous, real-time, live-streamed supports, as well as asynchronous, independent distance learning opportunities like you experienced from March through June of this year. It also details out a hybrid plan, a plan in which the schools do open, but we control the number of students in the building. In fact, in that plan, we will be limiting the student load to only 50% of our capacity on any given day. The intent of that plan is to simply reduce the density. Students will still have the opportunity to attend school every week on a rotating basis, 2 weeks in and 3 days at home of distance learning, but they'll be doing so in a building that is much less densely populated, therefore in a building where the health mitigation strategies will likely be significantly more effective. And finally, this plan also details out a full return to distance learning. The plan talks about all three of those conditions and puts out details around all three of those conditions. So in effect, the plan really shakes out into 21 separate plans, a plan for each building in each of those three different conditions. Finally, it's really important to know that this document is not a finished product. This document is a living document. It will continue to change and evolve between now to the opening day of school, and in fact, likely beyond the opening day of school. We submitted this report to the State Department by the end of business, the State Department of Education, by the end of business on Friday. And before the end of business on Monday, significant details around the reopening had changed as part of the governor's press conference yesterday afternoon. So please remember, this is high level. It is not detailed to the individual buildings. We are still working on those details at the individual building level, and it is likely to continue to change and evolve. So as we answer your questions tonight, I ask for your patience as you hear, we don't know yet, or we're still working on that, because I guarantee you that those are answers that you will hear tonight. And with all of that said, I'll jump into the first question that comes from Joe, and it is a reminder, or it's bringing to our attention, if everybody's not already aware of this, that the Major League Baseball season started less than a week ago and has already had to experience a delay of games because the Marlins have experienced an outbreak within their organization. The question is, if even Major League Baseball cannot control the spread of COVID with the resources at their disposal, how do we believe that we can control that in a school setting? The best answer that I can give to that is to say that right now, Connecticut has some of the best numbers around viral spread in the country, if not the best numbers around viral spread in the country. We are being advised by the state health authorities that it is reasonable and safe for us to begin considering reopening of Connecticut schools, as long as we place significant mitigation strategies in place. Now, I realize Major League Baseball put mitigation strategies in place as well. In yesterday's press conference, the governor gave more flexibility. Originally, just 24 hours ago, the state of Connecticut was assuming that all districts would be opening in the fully open phase, in the fully open condition, inviting all students to return to schools. It appears that the state is now suggesting there is some latitude to open up in the less densely populated hybrid strategy. And that is flexibility that we are looking into. We do not have those guidelines in writing at this time. We're asking the state to provide those guidelines to us specifically in writing. We're not sure if that flexibility applies only at the high school level or all the way down through the entire school system. But as soon as we have those details, that is certainly a consideration that we will make in Guilford. And we will make what we consider to be the best, safest decisions that we can make within the guidelines that are established for us by the state of Connecticut. It's important to note that education as a constitutional right is controlled by the state of Connecticut. And while the state devolves authority for local decision-making to us here in Guilford, to the Board of Education in Guilford, and through the Board of Education to the administration, the state requires how many days a year you will go to school and what constitutes a school day. And at this moment, the state is still requiring 177 school days, and the state is shaping how we may count those school days. We may be allowed to count hybrid days. We need to find out more clearly. We will meet the mandates of the state of Connecticut. We will follow the safety protocols and guidelines set out by the state of Connecticut, and we will do what we consider to be safe and appropriate for our students here at the school level. But again, we work in conjunction with the state of Connecticut. We do not make those decisions independent of the state. If we felt that it was not working, we could close the schools locally, but we need to close them with the expectation that any missed days will be made up. And again, that is a symbiotic relationship with the state of Connecticut. Related, I see a question from Max, who is asking why our plan does not include temperature checks. And I've been asked several times in the last several days why our plan does not include formal COVID testing on some kind of weekly or bi-weekly schedule. The answer to both of those is similar. First, the CDC and state epidemiologists are not recommending temperature checks for schools any longer. They were earlier in this pandemic. They have advised us that temperature checks are not reliable as a way of screening students before they get on a bus or before they come into school. One reason is that many people can be positive and asymptomatic. And so taking a temperature screening and finding that a child has a normal temperature is in fact not indicative that the child may not be positive for COVID and would in fact project a false sense of security. And on the other hand, young children will often have temporary spiking fevers, particularly in the shoulder seasons of a school year, where it is warm outside, warm in classrooms, and particularly when they may have just been running around at a bus stop waiting for a bus to turn up. We have been told that it is not reliable and that it is not an effective screening measure, and so we have been advised not to include that in our plans. When you think about actual formal COVID testing, we have explored that at the local health authority level, and there's two reasons that we won't be moving in that, well, three reasons that we won't be moving in that direction. One is that many of the quick tests also have pretty low reliability rates. Two is that I don't believe, and neither does the local health authority, that we have a local authority to stand up and require an additional medical screen or bar to a child's access to a free, appropriate public education. We're required to open our doors to every Guilford student. The only medical bars at this time to attendance, things like the current vaccine requirements or physical requirements, those are in fact embedded in statute. And a local school district doesn't have the ability to create another medical bar to attendance. A child has a right to a free, appropriate public education. If that hurdle were to be established, it would have to be established at least at the governor's level, if not at the legislative level. And finally, we've been advised that we simply do not have the capacity to stand up that kind of testing regimen. We don't have it locally, and if we attempted to do that at a state level with 500,000 students attending schools in Connecticut to be tested every week or every 2 weeks, Connecticut does not have the ability to do that kind of testing. We simply don't have the capacity to pull that off. To have been ready to do that would have required probably federal action, and it would have needed to occur months ago in order for us to build that into our reopening plans in any state, anywhere in Connecticut. Finally, we're also not being advised that that's a requirement. We continue to be advised by the CDC and by our local authorities here in Connecticut that we can open schools safely at our level of viral spread in the state without that as a required screen. And there's a question from Alicia that moves in a very different direction, and it's asking if typical peers will be allowed to attend the preschool, the pre-K program. At this point, yes. At this point, we are expecting to run a pre-K program that would include both students who require special educational services at that level, as well as the regular number of typical peers that we would normally enroll. And I'm going to take a breath there. The next question is lengthy, so it's going to take me a little while to read as I go ahead and catch my breath. And this one is suggesting that at the current Connecticut numbers, with some of the lowest viral spread anywhere in the country, even businesses, indoor businesses, are still required to limit capacity to 50%, and asking in the hybrid model, wouldn't we be doing that? And therefore, why are we not planning for an opening in the hybrid model? The hybrid model does do exactly that. In the hybrid model, we would be looking at any classroom, assume any class of 20 students, and that could be a class at any level, a third grade class or a high school history class. If there are 20 students scheduled in that class, the principals would be creating a cohort schedule within the class. 10 of those 20 students would attend on Mondays and Tuesdays, and 10 of the other 10 students would attend on Thursdays and Fridays. The classroom teacher would be supporting both groups of students, again, through a blend of asynchronous instruction and synchronous instruction, where they would be actually live streaming portions of the day out to the students who are at home, inviting them in to be part of those activities, and through asynchronous activities. Again, as I mentioned sort of in the opening, we are considering that hybrid opening. Since 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, when we first learned that we might have the opportunity to open in a hybrid model, we have been engaged in very deep conversation about whether or not we will open in the fully open or in the hybrid model as we begin to approach the opening of school. I have meetings later on in this week with other neighboring school districts to try to see that we can make a decision if we can make a decision that would be regional in scope rather than specific to Guilford. And we will know more about that as time unfolds. Again, I need to reiterate, we're not exactly sure if we have permission to do that only at the high school or if we have permission to do that all the way down through the lower grades. We need more clarification from the State Department of Education. Jason, I'm going to take a breath and let them listen to somebody else talk and ask you to take that next question, which talks about if a child does come to school and end up having a fever, or a staff member, if somebody comes in feeling well in the morning, but by 10 o'clock in the morning, they're beginning to spike a fever, what would be the procedure for responding to that situation?
Yes, we would have the school nurse meet with the child and or the teacher. If they're running a fever, we're coordinating an isolation room in each school that we can put the individual in so that if other people are ill with other symptoms, they will not be in contact with each other. Obviously, they would be speaking with their doctor. We are in the process right now, our Director of Nursing, Pam Nelliber, and our Medical Director are working on a plan regarding what the next steps would be in terms of testing and quarantining based on the individual cases. So that is yet to be finalized because we're meeting with our local health officials with that as well. My best guess at this point is we would not have either individual back in the school environment until we had assurances from a physician that they were safe to come back. You're on mute.
Yeah, I apologize. I started talking while I was muted. And Max had asked, what tracing capabilities do we have? As you look at the plan, you will see the word cohorting being used repeatedly within the plan. The plan of cohorting students really achieves two purposes. Cohorting is the idea of keeping small groups of students together and discrete throughout the school day. Now, that's a big compromise for us. An important part of schooling, particularly as you begin to enter into Baldwin, those middle school and high school years, is the social mixing and social opportunities that happens at school. As we open this school year, we will be severely limiting that, particularly at the elementary and middle levels. When students enter school, even at Adams, they will essentially go to a class in a group of 20 students, 18 or 20 students, and they will remain in that class with that group during the school day. It is teachers who will rotate through the schedule and go in visiting that group. Cohorting, again, keeps the groups small and discrete so that if we do have a child who becomes symptomatic or tests positive, we will have a much more limited exposure. But cohorting also facilitates contact tracing. If we do have a positive identification in the school district, it should be much easier to look back and see what students, what teachers that student came into contact with, either on the bus or in the classroom, by maintaining these stricter cohorts. Now, that's much more difficult at the high school level. We are not cohorting to the same level at the high school. We're looking at other interventions at the high school. But we do have plans in place, and cohorting facilitates contact tracing as well as the isolation. Anine, I see a question from Jennifer that I like, and I know you're going to like. She asks about important instructional strategies that we imply or that we have traditionally built our program around, things like small group collaborations and teacher conferring with students. Can you talk about the ways that teachers would be able to continue these sorts of instructional strategies when we are wearing masks and trying to maintain social distance in classroom settings, whether it's in a full opening or a hybrid setting?
Sure, that's a fantastic question, and it's one that has been on my mind, and I know many of our minds since this whole pandemic started. And it will certainly be challenging to maintain conferences, conferring with students one-on-one and small group instruction. But I think that there are creative ways to do that. One of the things we've seen in our summer program, which has been fully distanced this summer, is that individual conferences with students have been very successful and have really benefited the learning of the students. Now, it could be if there are small groups of students in classrooms with plexiglass barriers between them and the desks, that there will be some way to do a small group instruction without compromising the health and safety of students with barriers and masks on. It is certainly not an ideal situation, and it is not going to be exactly what it was before, but we're also looking into the use of digital tools that we have at our disposal to increase the availability of opportunities to work with small groups and to confer with individual students, in addition to looking at how we can use those tools to provide feedback, because feedback is a critical piece of that small group and individual conferring, and that's what makes it successful, is the individualized feedback and the quality of that feedback. So we are now exploring different ways of doing that, both physically and digitally in this environment. You're muted.
We also see a question here from Rebecca. Rebecca is noting that this whole process feels really rushed to her, that we're rushing to put these plans together to make it in time for a first day of school. And she's suggesting, why not delay the reopening of school until the plan is complete, or at least consider easing into this by opening in the hybrid model rather than in the fully opened model. Rebecca, first, I want to say that I agree with you. Much of this is rushed. Everything that we have been doing since March has felt rushed. What I will tell you is that the board has made several concessions. We have modified our student calendar twice now. Our first student day has been pushed back till September 10th. We have pushed 7 teacher learning days into the front of the calendar. The teachers will return to work on August 31st, and they will have 7 full days of training, of planning time, of collaboration time to be able to begin to get ready to receive your students. We'll be talking about some of the instructional demands that are going to be placed on teachers, like the ones Dr. Crystal was just speaking to. We will be talking about safety and health protocols that will be in place in new schools. We'll be talking about trauma-informed instruction and reminding our teachers that your children are returning to school after having missed a quarter of last year in a setting where we're still experiencing a national pandemic, and into an environment where their teachers are wearing masks. And we realize that we're going to have to deal with the social and emotional realities of that. We're going to talk about returning to a school and re-engaging in social opportunities as well as academic opportunities, and talk about how we do that safely. So we have delayed the school year to a degree. It's only a week and a half, but those are important days to give us time to respond. Again, I have to go back to the point that while we are doing this in a way that we feel safe and responsible, we also have state mandates that we are required to meet. And so we're required to have these plans in place. And as I mentioned earlier, the idea of easing in with a hybrid model is, it became open to us 16 hours ago. Well, maybe 36 hours ago now, and it is under serious consideration. That is a possibility that we're seriously considering. And again, like everything else, I'm going to need to ask you to give us a little bit of patience and a little bit of time, and we will certainly be responding with any adjustments to our plan for reopening as soon as we know those. And Heidi asks, and I believe Dr. Crystal spoke to this a little bit, If we do, and actually Heidi asks, if we return to distance learning, what changes will be made? How will things be different? And will we do better with it than we did in the spring? The quick answer is that we're going to have distance learning as part of any model in which we return. If we return in the fully opened condition, we expect somewhere between 10 and 30% of our student population to remain at home. Remember, individual families will have the option of keeping their students home, even if we reopen the schools and invite all to return. Those students will be supported through a distance learning structure. If we're in the hybrid model, fully 50% of our students will be supported in a hybrid model on any given day. All students will be supported with a hybrid model across the week. It will be, again, a blended approach of in-school and distance. And if we return to a distance model, then obviously all or most students would be in that situation. The quick answer is we have learned. We have learned the impact that real-time, face-to-face synchronous contact has for our student population. We know that some teachers had a higher ratio of synchronous to asynchronous activity, and we know that some teachers leveraged the power of video and real-time meetings like this one more effectively than others did. There will be a greater expectation for more of that to occur. In the first two models, the model will be immediately strengthened by the opportunity to join into real-time classroom opportunities that are happening. So remember, whether we're in the hybrid model or the fully opened model, the students who are being supported at home, either because of parental choice or because of the hybrid schedule, will have opportunities to be live streamed into the classroom, to participate in direct teacher instruction that is occurring, and to participate in real-time student conversations that are happening. That will be new for us. I don't think that we will be leveraging that to its greatest capacity in the first weeks of September. But if we're in that condition for an extended period of time, I can tell you that as we settle in and as we get more comfortable in that model, that we will become more effective in that model. Dr. Crystal, is there anything that you wanted to add on that one? I know that your summer learning pathways are going to be important to the work moving forward and what we're learning here.
Yes, and I think I agree with you completely when you say that we've learned a lot, and we've learned even more during this summer session, and we've learned about the power of inquiry-based learning that relies on the principle of learning of self-management, and we've learned that our students are extremely capable, and when they're engaged and they're working independently on things that are authentically interesting to them, they do amazing things. And we've seen incoming kindergartners and first graders creating incredible products in a virtual world. So we have learned, and distance learning will certainly look different and will be improved if that needs to happen again.
Jason, I see a question about HVAC, air circulation in the buildings. Can you talk a little bit about what we're doing with the air systems in the schools?
Sure. It was a great question by Melissa. Mr. Gurnham and I are working on increasing the air circulation rates in each of the buildings. The state has given us some guidelines on what we could hope for in terms of fresh air coming in and exhausting air out. We've also, in our circulation and HVAC systems, have installed greater capacity filters in each of the buildings. And the question about simply opening the windows would make a huge difference. I agree where it's applicable and won't impact the exchange rates in the various HVAC systems across the district. But the answer to her question in short is yes, we are increasing the air circulation in each of our school buildings and offices.
We're also looking at providing more outdoor opportunities. When the weather allows, we will be encouraging teachers and classes to take students outside, both when appropriate for instructional opportunities, but also for breaks, for mask breaks. Indoors, students will be required to keep their masks on, so teachers will be looking to schedule opportunities to go outside, allow the students to gain appropriate distance from each other and just take their mask off for a little while. We are actually looking into the opportunity to install large sort of festival quality tenting at each building, so that each building will have at least one area where that opportunity remains available even in inclement weather. So obviously we'll have greater opportunities to do that in dry or in at least close to warm weather, but we're looking at the opportunity to include a tented area and possibly an enclosed tented area to expand those opportunities. I also see another question here about temperature checks. The question comes from Christine, and it is that even though the state doesn't require it, if we had the resources to do it, would we consider adding it back in? The quick response is that the state stopped requiring it because they didn't find it effective. They're not just not requiring it; they're suggesting that it could be misleading because of the false negatives that it might encourage. So it's not that we simply don't have the money. It's that we're not being recommended to do that anymore, although it's also then becomes an expense that we can avoid and place those investments into other mitigation strategies that the experts are telling us are going to be more effective. I have a question from Jennifer asking what recess will look like. And the quick answer is that, well, the answer is actually phrased, can you describe what recess will look like? The immediate and honest answer is no, not yet. Those are decisions that will be made at the building level. I can tell you that we will continue to provide recess opportunities, but we're going to need to work with students to make sure that they're continuing to practice social distancing. I hope that it will allow students to have a time where they can be mask-free, but we will need to make sure that they are maintaining appropriate social distance if they're to be mask-free. We have already talked about the fact that this may require more recess spaces, and again, less social interaction. Recesses may have to be done by individual cohort and class rather than bringing whole grade levels together. So again, students may not have the opportunity to see a friend who's in another classroom or another cohort, but we will make sure that we have opportunities for unstructured recess time. Hopefully it is always outdoor. Hopefully it will be unmasked. It may require us to increase our recess monitoring. We're looking at the need to possibly bring in more recess monitors and use more spaces. But again, the principals are really working on detailing that at every location, just because the spaces are different, grade levels are different, and the details will be more fleshed out at that level rather than in this initial high-level plan. There's a question about whether new family orientation will be via Zoom or in person. And that's a question that applies more broadly to all of our activities rather than just new teacher orientation. I had an email question. I think Dr. Balistraci and I both had an email question before we began about things like extracurricular activities like clubs. We are exploring doing some of our traditional activities in Zoom. Because it will allow us to maintain cohorts. If we have classroom cohorts during the school day, but then want students to be able to come together after school in an interest-focused club, it is likely that we are going to either have to cancel that activity or make that activity virtual, because otherwise bringing the students together would violate the cohorts that we work so hard to maintain during the school day. So some clubs may move to a Zoom-based meeting structure. The Board of Ed has been meeting in Zoom-based structure since March, but we recognize that we need to begin to meet in person again at some point. Our audience will be limited. Public meetings are still limited, I think, to either 25 or 50 audience members. So we may end up seeing board meetings or parent meetings in the future that are some combination of Zoom and in person. And as principals begin to schedule things like student orientation, parent orientation, back to school night, and other traditional events, I just can't tell you now if they will be Zoom-based, in person, or some combination of the two. In many ways, Zoom has been a really valuable tool that we resorted to out of necessity and are beginning to discover is going to have continued value even once we do get beyond this and once life returns to normal. We may continue to have parent events like this one by Zoom, because I'm seeing almost 200 attendees in this meeting right now, and we rarely put 200 attendees physically in one of our meetings when we hosted it in a library or an auditorium in one of our schools. So I can't answer the specific question. I can tell you it will be one or the other or a combination of both. Dr. Balstraci, I don't know if you wanted to say more about the board's interactions with the community during this time or moving forward.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Freeman. So one of the things that those of you who have been watching our meetings or participating have noted is that we have been using Zoom for these meetings. We definitely need to now consider how to bring the meeting back into an in-person meeting. As Dr. Freeman noted, one of the considerations we do have is that because, and again, it is my understanding at the moment that it is a 25-person limit for indoor events or meetings. And we have a 9-member board, approximately 4 administrators and a note taker, that would really limit the ability for the public to be part of that meeting. And that's a really important part of any meeting, is that the public always has access to Board of Education meetings and conversation. So we are going, as Dr. Freeman noted, we're going to have to creatively think about how we can combine both kind of an in-person Board of Education meeting with the ability for the public to participate. And we'll certainly let the public know as soon as we find an approach that, again, really allows the public full access to all of our meetings.
And I see a question from Ariel about the use of video as an instructional tool. And specifically, she's asking about the legality around using video as an instructional tool as it relates to student privacy. I think there's a really good example built in to illustrate the question. If a class is being live streamed and students are participating in that class at home, and I as a student do something that requires teacher redirection, and that redirection is done on video, has my privacy been violated? So one, I'll answer the question legally. We have sought legal opinion on this, and we have legal opinion that it is appropriate to be using video as an instructional tool, specifically during this period of time. That yes, it's okay for students to be participating, even though we know students at home are watching on a video screen, and there may be a parent who is in within earshot or can see the screen and see what is taking place. There has been, the opinion includes nuance in that in settings where students are having specifically identified special needs addressed, whether those are instructional or emotional or social, that is now different. If the student has a diagnosed exceptionality, and that exceptionality is being addressed instructionally. So you can, in school, we offer social skills groups that are led by a school psychologist or social worker. We have special education instruction that is delivered that specifically targets a child's diagnosed exceptionality or learning need. In those settings, we have been told that the ruling, the legal opinion is different. And so in many of those cases, that instruction is now being delivered individually if the student needs to have that instruction delivered through video. What was really interesting is that recently, Dr. Crystal and Mr. Scanziano, who is our special education director, and I hosted a focus group meeting with just parents of students with special needs. And while they recognized and appreciated the caution that we were putting in place around those types of instructional settings, they were actually saying, I'll sign a waiver in a minute if it allows my student to be doing this work collaboratively with other students rather than doing it individually. And it was one of the pieces that they really wanted us to push against and question coming back into school. And so we're looking into that, and we're looking into first making sure that those sorts of opportunities can happen in person, in a real space in real time, but also looking to find out if we can have parents sign waivers to allow students in those situations to have individualized instruction. Again, when the instruction is general to the whole group and is not individualized, even though a student will be spoken to by name periodically, there has been no legal concern with privacy around those opportunities. Remember, we're not publishing those videos. We're not posting them for the community to watch. They are instructional. Most of them are not recorded or archived. When we do record or archive any of the pieces for other, it's still only students within the class who have access to those archived video experiences. But then let me also speak to it beyond the legal answer. We're learning through this. We're getting better at using video as a tool the more experienced we become with it. Just as adults during Zoom meetings, I'm finding that we need to discuss norms of our behavior together during Zoom meetings in ways that I had never expected. This meeting is an exception because there's now still 177 of you participating. But when there's a meeting of 10 or 15 people, I usually start the meeting by asking everybody to please turn their cameras on. It's really interesting to find yourself in a meeting where half of the participants have their cameras turned off and you can't make eye contact and you don't get facial expression as part of the communication. We're asking people to think differently about how we use these video tools. Teachers are learning about the norms for student behavior, the expectations for civil discourse that happen in those settings, and how we use these tools moving forward. As we return to the classroom, we'll be learning about camera angle. Will the camera be spending most of its time on the teacher, or will the camera be picking up student activities? It's really important to note that video will be used in nested ways. I anticipate that there will be portions of a class where the camera is trained on the teacher only, and the teacher is delivering the direct instruction component of that class. There will be other times where the class breaks up into 5 small groups, each of which contains 2 students sitting in the class and 1 student at home, and the video component is a Zoom breakout room where they're speaking to the Chromebook on which one student is participating. But that's not video that's being uploaded to a Google Classroom or sent out to a large group of people. It's only happening among the 3. And then that class will wrap up by a group debrief that might very well include the camera pointed at a group of students who are now talking to each other in real space and through virtual space about what happened during those group activities and what they uncovered and what they learned. And we need to think really carefully about things like privacy and things like how we talk to each other and things like the workspace at home and how private is that workspace that your child is using, how open is it to other people who may walk by and incidentally overhear. We're going to learn through all those components together. To me, that's more important than the legal answer. We will learn and we will get better through those portions as we move forward. And again, Dr. Crystal, I want to pause here. You've been working with our coaching cohort around questions like this. You've been working with instructional strategy. Anything that I failed to mention or just got completely wrong in that answer?
No, I agree with everything that you said. You got everything exactly right. And we are, again, practicing a lot, and we've been able to practice over the summer, and we've seen the advantages and disadvantages of video, and we've learned about ways that we need to clarify expectations around video and allow the teachers to use it to maximize their instruction in both synchronous and asynchronous ways.
So Kevin has a question here, and he's asking about that ability that parents have to keep a student at home, even if we reopen. What he's asking, though, is a pretty nuanced question. He's asking if parents would have the opportunity to have their child attend some settings in some activities at the school level, activities that the family might view as being less at risk because they happen in large spaces or are held outdoors, but remain home for classes that might happen in small indoor classrooms on a regular basis. The quick answer to that is no, not at this time. And it's simply a logistical answer. We are really, and again, it goes back to the question earlier about this feeling rushed. We are really working as hard as we can and as fast as we can to figure out a system, to put a system in place that will meet the needs of all students, whether we're hybridized, whether we're fully open with exceptions, or whether we're fully closed with exceptions. We feel good about the fact that we believe we've built a continuum so that one instructional model umbrellas over all those conditions and will be flexible enough to meet the needs of students and keep students connected to specific teachers, even if we're forced to move along that continuum multiple times during this school year. But the idea of becoming that nuanced, where a high school student might be distance learning for 3 classes, but in school for 4 classes, and monitoring that is something that we don't feel confident that we're ready. Now, remember, the system that we're in now has evolved in Guilford over 140 years. We've been a school system in Guilford for 140 years. The system that we rolled out in front of you up until March 10th of last year is a system that grew over that time, and that we really developed little by little each year. This is a system that's being designed out of whole cloth over this summer. And so I can see the value to that. And I hope that we are not in this condition for multiple school years. That might be an option that we could offer in the future, but it's not one that we feel ready to staff or be ready to launch with any confidence in this school year. So that's the answer at this time is just no.
Here, Dr. Freeman, I can help you here. I've had a chance
Thank
to
you
read
very
it. So
much.
we have someone who's asking, no, right? We have someone who's asking about the survey. They filled out the survey several weeks ago that the school sent out, asking about their choice for their student either to come back or not. And it appears that they're thinking now that they would change their mind. So I think the question really is, do they need to inform someone, or was that first survey simply a chance to get a sense of the numbers that we are looking at in terms of parents' comfort level with students? And when, I suppose, the follow-up question might be, when might students or parents need to make a decision?
So the quick question, I mean, the quick answer to the first part is that no, you don't need to change that response. It was really a measure. We wanted to have a sense of how many families right now were considering coming back. And again, the response to that survey was 65% of our population that felt confident returning, 10% of the population who said, no, we do not feel confident returning, and 25% who were undecided at that time. So somewhere between 10 and 35% of the students who felt unready to return. That was important in helping us as we decided that our approach was going to be along a continuum, that we were looking for one instructional practice that would bend and that would accommodate all 3 conditions. Again, this plan is not done. In addition to needing to continue to detail this plan out with each building principal at each local level, I said this repeatedly last night, but I don't know that I said it in tonight's meeting yet. We also have employees in the school district who are incredibly important. Their health and safety is very much as important to us as the student health and safety. We have contractual agreements with 6 different labor groups in this school district. We need to take this plan to each of those groups and discuss it with each of those groups before we move forward. We need to meet with every one of those individuals who, all of our teacher individuals who feel they may have concerns returning with our HR office. And we've got much more planning to do. The ideal is that if the plan remains in large part the way it sits today as we discuss it, if the blended learning strategy and staff numbers allow us to move forward with this plan the way that we've designed it, what will essentially happen is that each family and every student will receive from your school your assignment, your class assignment if it's elementary level, your team assignment if it is at the middle level, or your high school schedule listing the 5 or 6 or 7 teachers and classes that your child will see over the course of your high school schedule. You'll receive that later this summer than you've ever received it before. But once you receive that schedule, families will just then need to let us know if we're fully opened. Thank you very much, but we prefer to be doing this in a distance setting right now. Those will still be your teachers. That will still be your schedule. Your child will just be supported by those staff members from a distance. If we're in the hybrid model, you will receive both the schedule as I've described it and an indication that your child is in either cohort A which comes to school on Mondays and Tuesdays, or Cohort B, which comes to school on Thursdays and Fridays, and will be supported in the 3 other days through that distance learning structure. So no, you don't need to redo the survey. You don't need to change for us at this point, and you will only need to let us know if you're deciding to keep your child home before that first day of school, which 1, allows us to continue the planning that we need to do on our side, and 2, allows you as the family the most time to continue to watch local and national medical figures and numbers around the viral spread and make your decision as late as possible. We've received a number of questions in the last several days about whether that decision is final and is year-long. It's important to note that, again, just from a logistical planning schedule, we really need parents and students to recognize you can't make that decision week to week. You can't have your students attending one week, out the next week, back the following week. Logistically, that would, from a scheduling and logistical position, that would be really difficult for us. But the answer is no. If you decide to keep your child home in the first week of school, you haven't committed to the distance learning platform all year long. If your child stays home through September into October, and the national and local figures continue to, well, if the local figures continue to be good, if the national figures become better, and if you feel confident with what you're hearing from other people whose students are in the building, you will be able to ask to have your student come into school, and we will transition that child into the classroom without hesitation. The reverse applies as well, although I hope it doesn't happen. If your child is attending during the school year and then you end up for family reasons or because of the national profile of viral spread, you decide that you're no longer comfortable having your child in school, you can remove your child and we will begin to put distance learning supports in place. But again, as a system, from a logistical perspective, we just need to ask, and we will try to put some guardrails around the idea of changing repeatedly during the school year. That will be very impactful on the teacher. It will be disruptive to other students in the class, and it would be difficult for us to maintain if it happens in large numbers across the system. And so that's a piece of that response as well. Valerie has a question about back to school nights and about open houses for students to have the opportunity to come in and see the building and transition, particularly for kindergartners. Valerie, again, we're working on that scheduling. It is likely that within those 7 days before school opens, traditionally, we've only had 2 or 3 days before school opens, and I know that the elementary schools have generally set aside half of one of those days for elementary students and parents to come in and see their school and meet their teachers and see their classrooms. That is obviously going to be impacted by which phase on our continuum we're in when we choose to open, and there may be some differentiated response based on individual principals and individual buildings. I just can't answer that right now. The question is wait and see. Obviously, the hope is that we will have transitional opportunities. The other thing that I can add, and again, Dr. Crystal and I have talked about this a lot, the opening days of school in general for everyone will be more transitional than they have been in the past. We tend to think in Guilford that kindergartners coming in are going through a transition, that 5th graders starting Baldwin, 7th graders starting Adam, and 9th graders starting at the high school are going through a transition. Every child in our school system is going through a transition this year. They are all returning from distance learning into whatever model we're coming back into. They're all going to be meeting new teachers in some degree, to some degree, and school is going to look different to them than it did the last time they came. It's going to look different than it did on March 10th for all of us. So the first days and in fact weeks of school are going to be more transitional in nature at all grades for all students than they have in the past. Dr. Crystal, do you want to talk a little bit again about how the state has talked about returning to school and how we've been talking with our principals and even some of the outside experts we've worked with around the transition back?
Well, once again, I think we're talking about the social emotional piece, and that is going to weigh very heavily on everything that we do in the reopening and the transition back into school. We're really talking about starting the year with activities that are highly engaging and that really put an emphasis on students feeling comfortable with where they are and being successful in what they're doing. So all of our planning now is looking at ways to do that at the beginning of school, and to hold off on assessing students until they have acclimated and are feeling comfortable and are experiencing success and comfort with coming to school every day. That has been a lot of what I've been reading about and hearing about, and it certainly is on my mind as the most important piece of getting kids back into school again before really digging more deeply into the academic piece of it. And the social emotional will be infused and tied together with the academics going forward. So it's not, I don't want to make it sound like we're just looking at social emotional things in the first 6 weeks of school and then we're not touching that again.
Right.
We're looking at ways to really infuse that ongoing, and not just for this year and during a pandemic, but going forward from now on. We're looking at the Castle standards and infusing those standards directly into our curriculum, and looking at ways to make teachers comfortable and familiar with ways to address social emotional issues in their classrooms.
You want to tell our viewing audience what the Castle standards are? Not specifically, but generally.
It's an organization that deals with social emotional learning, and they have a set of standards, and they're considered the guiding body of social emotional learning. So we've been looking a lot at their standards and their documents, and talking about how we're going to infuse those into the work we do going forward.
There's a question from Stacy about when we designed this plan, we designed it under the assumption that we'd be fully opening schools, and that it seems that yesterday afternoon that has now been relaxed. And then Stacy also tries to tie me down and asks specifically, if we were opening today, what would my preference be? So first, yes, when we opened it, it was under the assumption that we would be opening fully, but we always assumed that we'd be moving across this continuum. Even though we thought we'd be opening fully, we knew that there was a really good possibility that we would have to retrench to hybrid or distance learning at some point into the fall or over the course of this coming school year. As we look at the plan now, that's become reality. And in fact, the timing may be great, because now, before the principals continue digging in and designing the specifics around a full opening at their building, we're going to get the clarification we need from the state, and we're going to maybe be able to focus on that hybrid opening if that's the direction that we lean. And Stacy, I'm going to be a little political here and tell you that I'm not going to give you an answer if we're opening today, because I'm not ready to yet. We met with the principal group today and just began having this conversation about if we have the ability to choose between hybrid and full opening. I want to know where the principals stand on that. Tomorrow, Mr. Bowden and Dr. Crystal and I have a meeting, and we've invited 350 teachers to be part of that conversation in the meeting that we're having tomorrow. I want to speak to the local health officials. I want to talk to Dennis Johnson and find out what his concerns are about those two models before we move forward. And really importantly, I want to talk to neighboring school districts, because if we can make a decision that aligns with 20 other surrounding school districts, that's going to facilitate, that's going to be better for our families. I know that there are some of you who are posting questions and watching this conversation now. You live in Guilford, but you teach in some of those neighboring school systems. And so it's all of those different constituencies are going to be really, really important, and you're going to be really important. We know that 65% of you were ready to return to a full opening. We're probably going to have to reissue the survey and say, in the hybrid fashion specifically, when your child was in 2 days and home 2 days, and the density of the building is reduced by half. Picture a high school not with 1,000 students, but 500 students. Under that condition, how many of you would be comfortable returning your child to school? And I'm going to want to see if those percentages move. Does the 10% saying no shrink, and does the 65% saying yes grow under the hybrid? So I'm just not ready to tell you that if it was tomorrow, what would I decide? I'll just tell you I'm glad it's not tomorrow. I'm glad that we've pushed it off to September 10th. I'm glad that we have the opportunity to gather more information. And again, I have to say, I'm not even sure if we have permission at this moment in time to make that adjustment at levels beyond the high school. I really want to see that guidance in writing, and we've requested that from the State Department of Education. And then Ashley moves us in another direction and asks simply, what if a child refuses to wear a mask or continues to take it off? How will this be handled? I want to tell you that first, it's going to be handled kindly, thoughtfully, patiently, and from an educational stance. We're not going to be suspending students for wearing the mask inappropriately. You've all been out into the supermarkets and you know how often the mask drifts below the nose. We're going to remind those students to lift their masks up. If a student is intentionally being disruptive or insubordinate by refusing to wear the mask, then we're going to reach out to the parent and we're going to ask the parent to be helpful in that situation. We're going to try to work with our students and encourage our students to understand that keeping their masks on is not only the best way for them to protect themselves and therefore their families at home, but is also part of a social compact. And I'm not afraid to talk about the social compact. We have responsibilities to each other in Guilford, and we have responsibilities to each other in our schools. And a child who chooses to be part of a classroom has a responsibility to his or her classmates and to his or her teacher. And the first thing that we can do to meet that is by keeping our mask on. We have been collecting instructional and educational materials around the importance of mask wearing, from Bill Nye videos to more age-appropriate scientific pieces at the high school level, to talk about the scientific and medical import of wearing a mask, and to talk about the social and emotional import, the relational import of wearing a mask and what that means. We hope that in those first few days of school, we're going to talk about that. Part of that social emotional wellness that Dr. Crystal talked about is addressing in the very first days of school with all of our students, why are we wearing masks? Why are we doing this? We've never done this before. We are looking into providing opportunities for teachers to wear plastic face shields at times. We're looking at buying masks that seal around the face, but ridiculously have visible cutouts in them so that students can see their teachers smile. We're looking at providing plexiglass dividers for teachers so that they can at times remove their mask and teach to the student in a way that is separated and safe, but allows for that visual contact. And all of that needs to be part of this conversation. But the social compact is important. We expect to respond to it in that way. We expect to include the family in the conversation. We will use our school counselors and social workers and school psychologists to support where necessary, but we don't plan on suspending students. We plan on collaborating with students to help everybody understand the medical and social responsibilities of returning to schools in this condition and how we rely on each other. I think that's just an enormously important lesson. We will not shy away from that lesson. If students have exceptions to the mask rule, we are saying that we will require doctor's notes. I want to be really clear about that. If a child has a medical exemption and a reason why they cannot or should not wear a mask, we will be asking for medical documentation around that. Currently, we ask for doctor's notes in all sorts of settings. If a child is excused from instruction, like PE, we ask for a doctor's note. If a child needs to access one of the elevators in our buildings, we ask for a doctor's note. It is that important. It is that essential to this reopening plan. And Dr. Crystal shared an article with the leadership team today that talked about the fact that the latest research is sharing that wearing a mask not only helps the spread of the virus, but wearing a mask individually can reduce the seriousness of any illness that you may experience, because the severity of any individual case is related to the total viral load. And wearing a mask yourself not only helps to keep you from contracting the virus, but if you do, it reduces the amount of virus that you take in and therefore may reduce the severity of the case that you have. It's just that important, and that's how we plan on working with our students. And this is such an important topic. I mean, do any of the other panelists want to speak to that mask question? We know that it is emotional for some people, but it is foundational to what we're doing when we talk about opening our schools. Really? Okay, so let's see. Ashley asks about teachers. if a teacher is unable to return to school for a particular reason, what plan is in place to ensure students. That's one of the reasons that school schedules are going to be late. We're working on staffing, and in fact, there was an earlier question about substitutes. We're working on identifying which teachers are capable of returning, which teachers are going to be delayed in returning or unable to return, and building schedules. We will work on making sure that every class is covered. Again, we're working on everything we can to keep class sizes small, and we will make those adjustments individually as we move through. I just got texted by some of our participants that we need to spend less time on each question because there are more questions coming in, and I'm spending about 20 minutes answering every individual question. So Jessica asks if the board is prepared to request that parents strictly adhere to the health guidelines. I think I sort of addressed that. Dr. Balistraci, do you want to just say yes, and then we'll move on to the next one?
Yes, I mean, it looks like this question is asking specifically about what might happen if a particular child's classmates are socializing with peers, perhaps outside of school hours. Certainly, as a Board of Education, we are going to ask all of our school community to adhere to state guidelines in safe behavior during a pandemic. But let me be very clear. We as a Board of Education cannot dictate to the parents of our students what happens outside of school hours, except to the extent that it impacts school instruction or school learning. So I think that one of the things that we will do as a Board of Education is really urge everyone in our school community to keep in mind the importance of social distancing outside of the home, of wearing masks, and of just reminding ourselves constantly that the more that we do that, we are protecting those around us as well as our own families. And we will continue to communicate that message. But we are really not in a position to dictate to the parents of our students what happens in after school hours.
Ciro asked what families and parents can do to support our efforts to reopen. I will point out that there is a section in the plan that says staying open is all of our responsibility, and there are suggestions for what we can do. Basically, it means to Dr. Balistraci's point, all of these conditions that we're putting in place in school, to the degree that you can follow those and continue to maintain those as a family, to the degree that you can check your child regularly for symptoms, that you can check for temperature at home, to make sure that if your child's not feeling well, that you keep them home. This is not the year to question your child's sincerity when they wake up and say they don't feel well and may they stay home from school today. The answer should be yes, and you want to let them stay home, and during that stay at home, check them to see if they are beginning to exhibit symptoms. It is all of our, to make sure that your children understand the importance of mask wearing and take it seriously. To the degree that families can reinforce and not undermine all of that, you know, Mr. Hoey and I went for a walk around the green earlier today and wore our masks. One, because we knew that we would be walking and talking to each other, and wearing the masks was going to be protective for both of us, but also because we knew that community members were going to recognize us, and it was important for us to be modeling that behavior. If there were high school students out who saw me walking the green today, I wanted them to see that I was wearing a mask. So all of that will be important at the family level. To the degree that you can encourage your students, whether they're 5-year-olds and don't understand, or whether they're 15-year-olds and questioning whether this is necessary or just or fair, to the degree that you can encourage them to take these mitigation factors seriously, you will help us to keep our schools open and keep the viral spread down in our community. And then Jamie asks about the cohorting that I mentioned. If we open up in the hybrid function, in the hybrid phase, and if there is a Monday, Tuesday cohort and a Thursday, Friday cohort, can parents request what cohort their children will be in? This question's been asked in a number of different ways over the last several days. So we plan on building cohorts that keep siblings on the same schedule. So if you've got siblings in different grades or in different schools, know that we will be doing everything we can to keep those siblings on the same schedule, so that you don't have two students who are attending school on Monday and Tuesday in your home and another one who's attending on Thursday and Friday in your home. We will essentially begin doing that by making the cohorts based on alphabet. Monday, Tuesday is going to be the front end of the alphabet, and Thursday, Friday is going to be the back end of the alphabet. That's a starting point, but we know that that won't work specifically for everybody, or because one sibling's class may have a lot of front-loaded last names and the next one may not. So principals will be working in making those cohort groupings in the very same way that they make class groupings. They will be collaborating across schools, however, to make sure that we're clustering those siblings together. And in unique circumstances, yes, a family can reach out. A family reached out already today to say that their work schedule already has one of the parents home on Thursdays and Fridays. So regardless of that family's last name, we're going to work to meet that, because we want to make sure that the cohorting model works as best as can be expected. And to the degree possible, we will meet those expectations of families so that the cohorting model facilitates your ability to have a reasonable and a predictable life at home with your children, and doesn't exacerbate the possibility of that happening. Now, I say to the degree possible because sometimes we end up getting, right, we can't make one of the cohorts 15 and the other one 5 because everybody in the group is asking for the same consideration. Same way that it's difficult to make third grade groupings. Your child doesn't always get in class with the friends that they want to be in class with. You may not get in cohorts with the same students. We will not be able to do it necessarily around social reasons or clustering with friends, but we'll do everything we can to do it around siblings and around family schedules. So that's a really important question. And Jamie, I appreciate you asking it. There's a question about our ability to require everybody to quarantine before they come to school. I think that goes back to the things that Dr. Balistraci and I have sort of been mentioning. We don't have an ability in the school system to check or to enforce. So we can ask parents to make sure that they're maintaining social distancing in their family lives. We can encourage families to quarantine. The state of Connecticut requires a 2-week quarantine if you return from any states that are on the identified list. But as a school system, I don't have a system to monitor that or a way to police or enforce that. So it's good practice. It goes to the idea of the social compact. It goes to the idea of families being able to help, but it's not something that we would be able to demand or enforce. A really good question about, I'm mentioning how this plan needs to be detailed out at all of the 7 buildings. The phases that buildings are in will be a district, community, or state decision. It will not be up to the individual principals. They may be different based on level. Again, I mentioned, I think in the beginning of this conversation, that the state of Connecticut may be saying that it's okay for the high school to be in a hybrid or a distance learning phase, but that all other schools need to remain in a fully opened condition. Those kinds of differences may happen. We will likely not ever be in a condition where one of the elementary schools is in distance learning and the others are all in a hybrid or a fully opened condition, unless we've identified that there may have been an exposure in one of our buildings. And again, that decision would happen collaboratively with the local health officials. There could be a time where we believe we have a suspected or confirmed exposure in one of the elementary schools. And so one school, well, it could be at a middle or a high school, one school could go into a distance learning phase for a 2-week period so that we can be sure that we've allowed any spread to right? It might be longer than a 2-week period. It again would be whatever the medical officials help us to determine. But you could have a school in a closed condition or a distance condition while other schools or all other schools were opened or partially opened, but that would only be as a result of a suspected or confirmed exposure in one of those settings. And again, there's some information in the plan about that. You can look at the plan and see more about that. And Rebecca is asking a question about that community education component. And again, I think that goes to some of the things that Dr. Balistraci and I have talked about. I can tell you that as we get closer to the school year and as we get on the other side of the first day of school, the Board of Education and I, and likely with Mr. Johnson or with Dr. Nolfo or with other school officials, will continue to have these kinds of conversations to talk about the importance for the community to be practicing these mitigation strategies as well. I'll be meeting with the Rotary in the coming weeks to have a conversation with those community members and talking about the importance of that in our school reopening plan. I know that messages will continue to come out of the town in the town hall about the importance. I expect that you'll hear sermons from your churches as we get closer, or your synagogues or your temples as we get closer to the opening of school, about the importance of all of us working together and relying on each other to ensure that we keep this community safe as businesses continue to open and as we make the big decision to begin to open schools. And Kathy asks about social distancing, whether we're implementing 3 feet or 6 feet. That's a really important question. The plan talks about practicing social distancing to the degree possible, whenever possible. The state plan does not require specific distances. It doesn't say 3 feet, it doesn't say 6 feet. We're not maintaining a specific distance. And again, if you've been shopping recently, you know that even though the marks are on the floor, when somebody traveling the wrong direction in the aisle passes you, they're less than 6 feet away from you just for those few moments, but they're less than 6 feet away from you. In our classrooms, we're going to be recognizing the importance of maintaining distance. We're going to wear a mask if we can't be at least 6 feet or more feet apart from each other, but we're not saying that your child will never be within 6 feet of another child in the classroom. We're not even saying that your child will never be less than 3 feet away from another child in the classroom. If that happens, we expect students to be able to self-correct, but we also know that there's going to need to be a lot of reminders and a lot of redirections and a lot of encouragement to develop those habits. If we're going to take a mask break, then we're going to go outside and we're going to make sure that we're more than 6 feet apart before students are allowed to take those masks off for a period of time. We know in some classes like PE, where the task or the activity intentionally designed into the class makes it difficult to wear a mask, that we will always be trying to maintain at least 6 feet apart. When we're outside and doing physical activities, PE will be 6 foot distance. When PE has to happen in a regular classroom because of weather, well, then masks are going to have to stay on and the activities are going to look very different. There will be PE activities this year that are less physical because of the ability not to get 6 feet, the lack of the ability to get at least 6 feet apart and take the masks off. Music is a real open question right now. Research is telling us that when students are singing or using wind instruments, that they need to be 12 feet apart at this time. So we've still got open questions around what music classes are going to look like this year. Will music classes have to happen without students singing in choral structures? Or will we find settings where we can get students more than 12 feet apart to be able to have those activities? That's just an open question right now. Social distancing will be a value. We will always be trying to build around it, but there is no specific measurement that goes along with it. And it's really important to be clear and candid about that. This plan does not say that your child will never be close to somebody as they pass by them in a hallway or in a classroom. The reality is that that will happen. But if we're masked and if we reduce that incident, then we're going to reduce exposure and we're going to mitigate exposure and we're going to keep a safe environment. So again, somebody's asking about the temperature checks. I absolutely understand that going to the doctor, they're still taking your temperature. And I know that part of the Marlin, that we're still seeing temperature checks built into a lot of other organizations. It's not part of the plan at this point. Again, the plan is open. The plan can change and evolve. I will tell you that after this conversation, I'll talk with Mr. Johnson again. I will raise it at the state level again. At this time, I can tell you that I know it's happening in other places. I've explained why we haven't built it into our plan, but I will acknowledge that it's been asked 3 times in this meeting, and I will follow up on that question. Jason, do you want to talk about the substitute question? It talks about what will happen if a teacher becomes ill and needs to be out, and is it going to be harder than normal to get substitutes this year?
Yeah, Ian asked a great question. The honest answer to that question is yes, for a couple of reasons. One, in any given year, under normal circumstances, it's hard to get substitutes or daily subs to come into our buildings. Unlike years in the past when I was much younger, I think the sub pool was more plentiful. This year, it's going to be more challenging because all the districts in the state are dealing with the same conditions that we are, where any number of our employees may be out for various reasons. So what would be a traditional sub pool, basically of retired teachers who are older, they may be more or less afraid to come in for a variety of different reasons that are personal to them. So yes, we're trying to address that by adding to our sub pool as much as we can. I think to his question in particular, it would depend if the teacher needs to be out, if the person is asymptomatic or feeling okay. There might be a case where they're home quarantining, but they can distance learn during the time that they're out. And then it'll be up to us to provide an adult in the classroom to make sure that there's supervision there. So there are a lot of variances to this, but yes, it's going to be a very challenging year for us to be able to fill positions and to have a sub pool, but we're doing the best we can with it.
While you're rolling, do you want to address the question about masks? Will the district be providing masks to students and teachers on a daily basis?
We have asked, and I believe Dr. Freeman, you have been asked this question a number of different times, that we're encouraging parents to have reusable, washable masks for their students. We encourage staff to have their own masks as well. However, we will be providing masks and have PPE available for our staff and our students who need them on any given day. So yes, the answer is we will, as needed.
And again, this goes to the partnership. In the same way that every year families receive a material list, the things that your child should have to be successful in school, essentially we're going to be adding we're going to be adding reusable masks to that list. If the district were providing them for all students and all teachers every day exclusively, we projected that cost would be more than $250,000. So we will have them. No child will be denied access to school for lack of a mask. If they misplace it on the way to school, we're going to give them one. But to the degree that families can help by absorbing that cost just for their children, it will relieve the school district of a significant expense that we had not budgeted or anticipated. Remember, we're working with a budget that was prepared and essentially approved before we knew that this was the year that we'd be entering. Now, we have received tremendous support from the town. The Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance have told us that we need to do what we need to do this year, but we have the reality of expenses. We know that next year is going to be more challenging at the state level. We know that it's difficult for the local taxpayers to provide the budget that they provide to us every single year. So we're doing the best we can to be reasonable with those expenses, and where we can, we will ask to partner with families, and this is exactly one of those areas. There's a question about and I know that both Branford and Madison have talked about schedules, at least at their high school, with half-day schedules, where they will be having, again, 50% attendance, but half of the students would be coming in the morning and half of the students would be coming in the afternoon. And the question is, have we considered modeling that schedule rather than doing the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday model that I've referenced a couple times? The quick answer is that yes, we've considered it, and remember, nothing is settled yet. We are still working through. Again, we had a lengthy conversation with the principals today, and we need to look carefully at specifically the high school schedule, but all of our schedules moving forward. We are looking at those schedules, and we're looking at the benefits, the costs and the benefits involved in those schedules. Right now, we tend to be leaning more towards the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday model. One, because it's one that more districts in our area, although our two immediate neighbors are both looking at something different, approximately 20 districts along the shoreline are looking at modeling that calendar and following that calendar. And then two, our current thinking is that 2 full days a week can be more beneficial to students and more easily absorbed by families than a half day every day during the week. Now, I know that that's going to be wrong for some families. I know that that's not going to be necessarily true. We will look at the total contact minutes. Remember, those 3 days out of school are not days off. Those are distance learning days. So the answer is yes, we're looking at them. We're measuring them. We're leaning in a different direction now, but the final decision has not been made. There was a question that I'm going to answer in one word. Are we going to try to limit movements from one phase to the other? The answer is yes. To the degree that we can maintain consistency, but the goal, remember, is always to be fully open. So if we open in a hybrid model or a distance model, we will always be targeting trying to at least make enough moves to get back to fully open. Once we're in the fully open model, yes, we would like to limit changes, but not at the expense of safety or health. And so, yes, we'd prefer not to go back and forth 5 times. I'd love it if we can only change once. I'd like, you know, if we could open in the hybrid model and then evolve into a fully opening model, because the numbers are really positive come December or January, that would make me enormously happy. But yes, we'll do everything we can to limit that movement. There's a question about the impact that the teacher union can have on this plan. I mentioned that we need to talk about this plan with 6 bargaining units. Every one of those bargaining units is important, not just the teacher bargaining unit. We have contracts with those groups, and we need to meet the conditions of those contracts. We are not necessarily meeting with them to secure their agreement. We're meeting with them to talk about the impact that this plan has on the agreed upon conditions that exist in their contracts. We're required to have those conversations. We need to come to an understanding that the plan either fits within the conditions of the contract as written, and if there's areas where those conditions are substantially different, then we need to talk about how we're going to accommodate those differences. So the teachers are enormously important partners in all of this. If I haven't said this, I want to make this clear. There have been teachers involved in the development of this plan. Now that doesn't constitute negotiation. That doesn't qualify as the conversation I've mentioned, but we had teachers involved. Since the closing of schools, since the last day of school, Dr. Crystal and I have been hosting focus group meetings. Some of you have participated in those meetings as parents. We've met with parent groups, we've met with student groups, and we've met with teacher groups repeatedly to talk to the teachers both about the experience they had in March through June and what they see and what we see for us moving forward. So the teacher voice is enormously important in how this plan shakes out. And it was important in getting us to where we are tonight, and it will be important in moving forward. I see that teacher question again. 2 people asked that question independently of each other. And we've got a question from somebody who's asking what a virtual day of instruction might look like for a young student. So my understanding of this question is that this is a caregiver who is thinking about keeping their child home, even if we open in the full model. If their child is not going to school at all, while the majority of students are in class, what would the at-home distance learning look like for that child if the caregiver chose to keep them at home? Dr. Crystal, you want to take the first run at this one?
Sure, and it's a great question. And I think that the way we're looking at this and approaching it is to make the distance learning piece of this as seamlessly integrated with the actual in-school piece of the instruction as we possibly can, given the limitations of distance. So using the technology to the full extent possible, providing those synchronous opportunities, which doesn't mean a full 6-hour day is going to be streaming all day long. It means that the direct instructional pieces and components of the instruction are going to be, could be on tape, and that students can watch, or video that students can watch later or watch while they're happening. And then the teacher is planning strategically and conscientiously to provide mixed opportunities so that everyone is accessing the same instructional standards. So we're still talking about how that's going to get done, how we're going to do that. But that is the direction that our planning is taking. We're looking at ways to make this as seamless as possible, and so that students who are learning from home are not going to feel like they're getting something that's completely different from the students who are physically in class. Dr. Freeman, did you want to add to that?
No, that is exactly the way that we would approach that. So there's another question here, and it ties together a couple of conversations that we've had. We've talked about some parents, like this caregiver in this instance, who's thinking about keeping their child home. And we've talked about some staff members who may be unable to return because of a qualifying medical or other condition that keeps them from being able to return this September. The question is, why are we talking about this blended model, about a classroom teacher who is supporting the children in her classroom and the children outside of her classroom? Why not wed those two groups together so that the teachers who have to be home are supporting the students who are also home? And it's a really intuitive question, and it's a good question, and it's a really creative idea. The roadblock that we keep running into is the logistics of that and some of the other answers we've given, the fluidity of that. If we're not requiring parents to lock into that distance commitment in the beginning of the year, our hope is still that we're going to have students who may start at home, but then flow back into the classroom. Our understanding, our recognition is that we may have students who start in school, but then migrate out to the at-home condition. And we may not have teachers who are appropriately certified. The teachers who need to be home, if all of those teachers are high school certified math and science teachers, but most of the students who are staying home are elementary students, it's just really unlikely that we're going to end up with a match of the certification and expertise areas of the teachers and the needs of the students, and that match is actually going to hold all through the school year. And the one condition relies on the other. If we've got 10% of the students who are at home, and therefore we reduce the classes in the system by 10% to accommodate for that, and then those students begin migrating back into the classrooms, the existing classrooms are going to become more crowded. Class sizes are going to increase, and that works against the mitigation strategies that we're trying to put in place in the system. It becomes further complicated when we do shift up and down that continuum, because now if we're all in class and then move to a hybrid setting, how do we accommodate those students who are now fully at home already? Do they continue to be outside of that when that becomes a condition that they would naturally fit into? And so the blended model allows for the fluidity up and down the system and avoids the logistical challenges that are going to be presented by trying to marry those two groups. Please be assured that teachers who need to remain at home but are well enough to be working will be. We will find ways for them to continue to participate. Mr. Bowden mentioned that in some cases that may be short-term, like a required quarantine, we may be having teachers reverse distance learn into the buildings. We may have teachers who need to be home, but they use the distance platforms to be present in the classroom virtually for students who really are in the school. If you think about it, it's an odd way to think about it, but we've been saying over and over again that we might have 16 students in school, 4 students at home, and the teacher is supporting all 20 of them from her classroom. We could also have a situation where there are 16 students in school, 4 at home, and the teacher is supporting all 20 of them from her home office. She is using the distance learning platform to push her instruction into the system. Now, we would still have to add a paraprofessional or another adult to be in that classroom for supervision purposes, for classroom management purposes, but the content expertise and the instruction may in fact be coming in through the distance learning platforms in the same way that we could push out through the distance learning platforms. We may simply be marrying teachers together. A teacher who needs to be home may be offering additional support for students who are in the at-home condition, providing an additional, not remedial, but an additional supportive contact. We will figure out how to use those teachers and leverage those teachers, but building the whole plan around those teachers just continued to be untenable. Every time we took a run at it, we found that we ran into a tipping point where it was no longer going to be tenable. I'm seeing some repeat questions now that we're getting deep into the list. There's a question about if a student or adult in the building tests positive, will they need to have a negative test before being allowed to return? I would need to check with our medical experts, but I believe the quick answer is yes, that if somebody has been positive, I expect that we will require a doctor's clearance to return that person, and that will likely include a negative COVID test. I have a question here about loading and unloading at the middle schools, and I believe that's around the bus routes. We're still working on that, right? Buses, and there's a whole section in the plan about buses. Buses will now load and unload in logical fashion rather than traditional fashion. Traditionally, the oldest students sat at the back of the bus. You know, if you're in middle school, the 8th graders sit in the back, the 5th graders sit closest to the front. Same applies at the high school. Buses will now be loading geographically. The first student on will go all the way to the back. The second student on will go almost all the way to the back. We'll load from back to front, and we will unload from front to back. Our middle school run is a complication because our middle school buses need to stop at 2 locations. Mr. Bowden has been meeting with the bus company. Mr. Bowden's been talking to all the principals, including the middle school principals, and we have not worked that one out yet. What I do know is that to the degree that parents can drive their students to school and reduce the density on the buses, that question becomes a little less crucial and a little easier to respond to. If there's only 8 or 10 students on a bus, it might not be significant to have students walking past some other students to get off at Baldwin or Adams, whichever comes first. But we don't have the final detail there. We don't have the final answer. I'm seeing a repeat question about PPE being supplied to staff and teachers. I'm seeing a question about AM and PM childcare. We do anticipate that before and after school services will remain open next year at our elementary schools. I see a question about the possibility of splitting the grades. Is it possible that we would have some grades coming to school while other grades are in a distance or hybrid design? And again, the answer is yes, and we don't know if that will happen. So there's a question about outdoor classrooms. Have we received approval to create outdoor classrooms? The quick answer is not classrooms necessarily, but we are working at putting tented areas outside, areas that would be covered at least from the elements. And again, we're talking about possibly tented and sided areas, and we will be working closely with the fire marshal to make sure that anything that we put up is approved and acceptable. All right, here's a question that I love, Dr. Balistraci. How much additional money was requested by the Board of Education, and how much more are we getting this year to open schools?
Right. Thank you, Dr. Freeman. So, you know, we are in the process as we move forward. The administration is in the process of trying to understand what the additional costs for school reopening will be. As you can imagine, without knowing exactly what plan we will be going with or what design come September, this is a very hard thing to nail down. But we will be working with the Board of Finance, talking to the Board of Finance to, as we start to really get a better handle on what reopening costs in addition to the budget that we have already had approved, what those will look like, and understanding what the impact will be on our budget and what additional monies we may need from the Board of Finance and in support of these plans. Let me just add that, you know, again, I've noted the complication of making these assessments without knowing exactly which design we may need to reopen with. I also want to add that, as Dr. Freeman noted, we need to have discussions with each of our 6 bargaining units. So there are a lot of moving pieces in this assessment. of additional costs. I will note, echo what Dr. Freeman said. We have a town that is really aware, a town board of finance is really aware that this might, that these expenses might have been coming. These were conversations we had with them in March and in April when we were talking about the budget for this year. So I expect, again, as we move forward over the next few weeks, I am expecting that we will start being able to assess these numbers more closely. We will be having conversations with the Board of Finance and start to identify exactly financially what the impact might be and the kind of support we will need. The last thing I will say is, as you can imagine, we are hoping for some state support in this matter. But as you can also imagine, what kind of financial support might come or might be able to come is simply, there's simply no way to identify what that might be, and if any financial support will be coming beyond what we might have to kind of identify just within our town.
I see a question here asking, so I've talked about this a lot, but are we cohorting at the high school or not? The quick answer is no. Cohorting, as I've described it, is a plan for K through 8. The way the high school is currently scheduled, the way that classes happen at the high school, it's simply impossible to cohort students in the way that we're going to be cohorting them in the younger grades. The Connecticut guidelines do not require cohorting to happen, and I'm unaware of high schools across the state that are going to be working in that. What we'll be working with at the high school level is reducing class sizes and working with social distancing as much as we can. The students will obviously be cohorted on school buses. I mentioned how with after school activities, around club activities, they may be shifting to a virtual model, but we may also be continuing to offer athletics at the high school. Right now, the CIAC has not made a final determination. There are a number of draft plans out there for what a fall sports season might look like. If there is a statewide CIAC sports season, I anticipate that there will be significant interest in having Guilford participate in that athletic season. There are students who are participating in summer sports all over the community now. They're using fields throughout our town and fields that are associated with our schools. So the answer is no. We will be working with social distancing. We're working with masking, but cohorting is not being required at the high school level and is not part of this local plan. There's a question about just regular illness this season. As we, every school year we have students who get colds, who get flus, and how will we distinguish between these and COVID? If students are not feeling well, we're asking parents to keep those students at home. We know that there is asymptomatic transmission. We know that individuals can have COVID and be asymptomatic. We know that some people have probably become sick, felt like they had a cold, never been tested positive, and do not count in the total Connecticut or national counts of identified cases. If a student doesn't feel well and stays home, we again don't have the authority to demand that that family have that child tested. That child will need to stay home. That child should not come to school if they have a fever or symptoms. But it is a personal decision. It's a family decision. It's a doctor's and a family's decision for when a COVID test or screen should be administered. Right now, the school system doesn't have a place in that. So we will have students who stay home for a day or two because they're not feeling well. If those students then return to school, they'll be closely monitored by our nursing staff. We are looking at plans for that monitoring, but we cannot say at this time to a family, your child was home with a fever for 2 days, she's now fever free, and you may not send her to school. That's just simply not so. We just need to be really clear and really candid about that. That is not a requirement that we can put into place or that is built into this plan at this time. There's a question about outside classes and recess. Will we have opportunities for that? The answer is yes. We've talked about the tenting, and we've talked about trying to prioritize that. Again, a question about if a child is quarantined, will they have access to Zoom meetings, to the distance supports? Yes. If you and your child are attending school and then need to retreat home and be home or be quarantined for a period of time, yes, you may request the distance learning supports at that time. And that's exactly, again, to the question about logistics and scheduling. We know those numbers are going to be fluid. We are going to try to reduce that fluidity to the degree that we can, but it exists. And this is a perfect example. If your family needs to quarantine, then we're not going to tell you that your child misses 2 weeks of school in that situation. Again, questions about how we will enforce or encourage mask wearing in the school. Yes, we will be providing mask breaks during the day. I can't tell you how frequently or what those will look like. I anticipate they may be different by grade levels, but yes, we anticipate that those will happen. Someone who's just saying thank you for this meeting. We really appreciate that. Thank you for saying that. About before and after care. Yes, before and after care will continue to be available, we believe. Will we be checking in with students socially? Will we be paying attention to that? I think Dr. Crystal spoke to that. Yes, it is one of our primary concerns. The beginning of the school year will look different, and our focus on that will look different across the school year. In those 7 days of teacher learning that we talked about, we plan on spending time talking about trauma-informed instruction. All of our children have just gone through something that none of us have ever gone through when we were their age or when we were students. We are acutely aware of that, and we are concerned about their social and emotional wellness. And we'll want to hear from you. We will want to be communicating with parents. We will want to do everything we can to alleviate anxiety and help them transition back to school and be successful in school, not just academically, but socially and emotionally as well. How can parents and community members help? We talked about the social compact, tutoring and supports at home. Absolutely. And again, to the question about social and emotional, when we first moved into the distance learning phase, I sent a communication home telling parents that we believe that relationships are more important than rigor, and we believe that contact is more important than content. I have 4 sons. My youngest is still a high school student. I reminded myself over and over again as last year closed that his happiness and wellness was more important than his academics. And that's hard for me as a superintendent to embrace. I have 3 sons who are still college age, and I reminded myself that their GPA is not the most important thing coming home with them right now. How are they doing? How are they feeling? So to the degrees that you can help your children with their homework, to the degree that you can help relieve their stress around homework, to the degree that you can check in with them and talk with them about having fun this school year, regardless of what this school year looks like, enormously important. Mentoring and donations were also listed in ways that you can help. Support your PTOs. I'm absolutely going to say that. The PTOs are going to be in really different situations this year. Please support your PTOs. I know that any financial support there would be beneficial to the teachers in the schools. Your support of the PTO flows directly to our teachers. Mentoring, we've got a really successful mentoring program in this school system. We've got, on any given year, 160, 170 Guilford community members who donate their time to come in weekly and meet with our students. Please reach out to the Guilford Mentoring Program and offer your help. Please know that this year the mentoring program is being restricted to virtual meetings. The mentors are exactly the sorts of visitors and volunteers that, at least in the beginning of the school year, we want to limit them coming into the building. Teachers and students will need to be in the buildings, but ancillary folks, we want to limit those. So students will still have an opportunity to meet with their mentors, but it will be in formats like this one. They will not necessarily be able to go outside and shoot baskets with their mentor at the court at Adams for a while until things get back closer to normal. I'm seeing a note that just parents are really anxious and highly concerned right now about this plan and about what school's going to look like this year. All I can say is us too. We are all worried about what this year will look like, but we're channeling that worry into work. I can't tell you exactly what this school year is going to look like, and I've never said that in July in my 30-year career. We'll figure it out. We will get through it. We will adjust along the way, and we will listen to your feedback, and we'll do everything we can to meet your needs as a parent because you're supporting the needs of your children. We're all worried too, and we're going to go through this together. I don't have a better answer for you, but I appreciate you sharing that in the Q&A. Will student work be graded? At the end of last year, we shifted at the K through 8 levels to a pass-fail, and we offered high school students the opportunity to select pass-fail. Yes, we expect that we will be returning to grading of work this year. We're going to be in a modified condition for the entire school year. I will say, however, that we're going to be talking and working deeply with our teachers about what assessment and about what grading should look like as we return to school. I want to put a plug in here. There's an organization out of New Hampshire called the Center for Assessment. We have worked with the Center for Assessment closely for about 3 years now. The Center for Assessment are staffed by a number of really expert educators and psychometricians, people who think about educational measurement as much as they think about education broadly. We've worked with a couple particularly. We've worked with Dr. Susan Lyons, who has spent time working with the administrative team and science teachers, especially at Adams. And we've worked with the director, Scott Marion. Scott Marion has written some of the smartest pieces about how we should reopen schools this September that I've seen. If you go, just Google Scott Marion Center for Assessment and read any of his recent blog posts, anything that he's written in the last 3 months. And I think that that will help you to understand the position that we're taking as we return to schools. It's about relationship, it's about contact, it's about learning. It's not about scoring and grading. And we worked with our teachers as we moved into that situation in March. We'll continue to work with teachers as we come back this year. But yes, we will be issuing grades. We'll be focusing on what's important, but that's important to state.
Paul, there's been a couple of questions, around social distancing, and I know you mentioned this last night at the board meeting, but can you just briefly talk about our conversations with the chief of police and the fire chief about lockdowns and fire drills? There was a question asked about that and social distancing.
Yep. So we met a couple of weeks ago with both the local police chief and the local fire chief. We have some concerns around the requirements of both around security and safety at the schools, primarily around our protocols around intruder response and thinking about the lockdown drills that your children go through. We also have some concerns about fire code and about the fire drills that we're required to go through every year. The fact is that some of the guidance we're receiving from the state around COVID and around social distancing and cohorting is in fact sort of contradictory to some of the guidance and some of the mandates that we still need to meet around fire code and around safety protocols. So we met with both chiefs, we identified those areas, we had that conversation, and at a state level, there is a conversation going on about whether or not local school districts are going to receive some relief from the fire and safety mandates and protocols during this COVID period. For instance, we've talked a lot about our concern for students returning in these first few weeks of school and their emotional status during that return and helping them to come back and feel comfortable and feel settled and learn the protocols around social distancing and cohorting that we are now adding to their expectations. Well, we're also required by statute to have 2 fire drills and 2 intruder lockdown drills in the month of September. So we have asked whether or not there will be some latitude and whether we will be able to defer those drills into later in the year, or whether we can be excused from those drills and some other fire code expectations until we pass through this COVID period. That's not an answer that I expect from the local authorities. That's not their job to grant that latitude. They can't grant that latitude, but we wanted to speak with them. And I know that that question has been entered at the state level, and we're waiting for a response. The governor holds municipal update phone calls every week. I know that Mr. Hoey is often part of those phone calls. I try to make them as often as I can. And the governor and his team talk with municipal leaders, mayors, selectmen, superintendents, fire chiefs, police chiefs across the state. And I know that that's being looked into, and we'll continue to monitor that at that level. There's a question from Jennifer about what if I just withdraw my student fully from the schools for this year and take advantage of homeschooling or a private school opportunity? Can I return to the Guilford Public Schools the following year? The answer is an emphatic yes. We absolutely understand that even in normal times, some families in the community, for a variety of reasons, take advantage of a private school opportunity or a homeschool opportunity. You can have your child in a homeschool setting for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. If you're a resident in Guilford, you can always return to the Guilford Public Schools when you are ready to return. We will always welcome you and be happy to have your child back at any time. That may be the shortest answer I gave all night long. If Guilford needs to, again, a question about that balance between synchronous and asynchronous learning. Will we be looking at that experience as compared to last year? The answer is an emphatic yes. We're learning from the experience last year. We're learning from the summer, and the opportunities will look somewhat different this year, even if we return to a fully distanced model.
Dr. Freeman, I'm noticing several questions about lunch. Could you speak about lunch service for a minute?
Yeah, and I'll defer that one to Mr. Bowden, let him get started on that one.
I had a conversation today with our Director of Dining Services, Miss Biagetti, and the plan K-8 is to have breakfast grab and go before school starts and classroom delivery if needed after. Lunch orders would be taken in the homeroom, or what would be the classroom, in the morning. There'll be 3 cold options and 1 hot delivered to the classroom in a bag with a student name on it. That's for grades K-8. 9 through 12 is much similar. They'll be ordering online or through walk-up. We're looking at the high school cafeteria, removing tables, creating distance. We're looking at providing areas to eat outside and areas throughout the building to maintain as much social distancing as we can. I know I've seen several questions regarding to eating in the classroom and what happens with social distancing there, especially in classes that have a high number of students. And it goes back to what Dr. Freeman said about, to the best extent possible, having kids be separated within the classroom. In most of our classrooms, and especially at the elementary level, we have tables which will have dividers that we've ordered to help see-through dividers that will help protect students that are sitting, I wouldn't say adjacent to each other, but in proximity to each other. We've looked at purchasing a number of desk partitions that will protect students when they have their mask off during lunchtime, that they can have that divider up on their desk. So in the course of the last few weeks, we've been researching and working on the best alternatives that we can provide to keep our students safe, to have them eat in a safe environment. And I would also encourage, we talked a lot tonight about classrooms outside, having classrooms go outside to eat lunch when we're in good weather periods. So the answer is, depending on where you are, it will probably be in the classroom, and it's not going to be the same lunches that we have on a normal school schedule. It's going to be much like the lunches that were served over the summertime or March through June, and the selection is going to be pretty limited. I know there'll probably be a question about allergies as well. We're going to work with our school nurses to ensure that we have communications out regarding what can be brought into school, because if we're eating in an environment such as a classroom, we're going to have to be very careful about maintaining an environment that's safe for all children.
And we're just passing the 9 o'clock hour, but there's a couple quick questions that I scrolled through as I was looking. We haven't answered all the questions that have been listed in the queue tonight. I know that as I'm looking down, I'm seeing more and more repeats, which is good. We have answered many of them at this point. But there was a question about the cameras we mentioned. We talked about live streaming and cameras being used in the classroom. And the question is, where will those cameras be located? The answer is that they'll be portable. Teachers will have cameras that they can wed to their computers and that they can move. We're not mounting permanent cameras in the classrooms that give you one set distance shot. And again, I cannot emphasize enough that live streaming will not mean that a teacher turns a camera on at the beginning of class and your child is sitting at home watching the full 50-minute class from beginning to end. The teacher will be able to position that camera during the class in appropriate places at appropriate times. And in fact, the camera that any one student is watching will probably change over the course of the class period. So again, when the teacher is maybe in the front of the room or at a smart board doing a direct overt instruction component, which usually only lasts 15 or 20 minutes. The camera may be on a stand pointing at the teacher, and the students are watching the teacher at the whiteboard giving direct instruction. The students may then immediately shift to a small group and their camera changes to just be the camera on a classmate's Chromebook so that they're talking to a classmate in a breakout room, and all the students at home are actually using different cameras. They're on individual Chromebooks set around the classroom. And then at the end of the classroom, as the teacher does a whole group share out and debrief, that same camera that started the lesson might be turned around, so now it faces into the classroom so that students can see their classmates as they talk about what they experienced during the class period, and in fact participate in that conversation. And so you are all students in the class, you're just in different places. And then I saw another question that came through that I want to sort of finish on. The question was, you all worked on this plan for weeks, submitted the plan to the state, and then the plan changed on Monday. The governor announced that there were greater latitudes that were being offered on Monday. Is that going to continue to happen? Should we assume that there will be more changes as we move forward? The answer is yes. We should assume that there will be more changes moving forward. There are discussions happening at a state level around the mask requirement right now. We may find out in a few days or a few weeks that kindergarten students have been excused from the mask requirement because of their age. Preschools that are open right now are not requiring masks of all their students. So we may find that things as foundational as that can change in the next few days. I cannot say emphatically enough that this will continue to be an evolving and growing living document responsive to local questions and concerns. We heard questions here tonight that we're going to go back and explore further, and those may change important pieces of this plan. The state may make more announcements that may change the nature of this plan. It will continue to be a growing and moving document. We can't say that clearly enough, but I do want to ask if Dr. Balistraci or Dr. Crystal or Mr. Bowden, if you have closing comments or statements that you want to share. And I do want to say that we'd said we'd go for 2 hours or until we exhausted the list. We're not close to exhausting the list. We need to have more conversations. You can continue to share your questions with Dr. Balistraci and with me through email. We will continue to respond to them. Your principals are becoming more and more ready to start answering questions for you as we begin to do the work at the individual building level. And if necessary, we will talk tomorrow about rescheduling a follow-on opportunity for this so that we can get more questions asked maybe later this week or next week. We'll certainly look into that. I do appreciate all of you who spent time with us tonight. And again, do any of my co-panelists have a closing comment before we say goodnight?
I just want to thank everybody for their questions. You know, they were very thoughtful, and you know, I know there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and to some degree there's uncertainty for us. You know, every time a plan is made, the ground under tends to change. But you know, I'm grateful to be working in this community and for the past 8 years, and I know we'll get through this, and through your support and working together, we can. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to say too that I appreciate all the questions, and we have a lot to think about, but we want to assure everybody that we are working as innovatively and creatively to provide the high caliber of instruction that, sorry about that, that people have become used to in this district, and that we're not compromising on quality. We're going to do the best we can to provide everything we can to our students with the health and safety considerations at the forefront of what we do.
And I just want to take a final moment to really thank Dr. Freeman, Dr. Crystal, Mr. Bowden. I mean, this is just the amount of work that is going on right now in Guilford Public Schools to prepare for the educational and safety needs of each of your children this fall is extraordinary. It is an extraordinary amount of work that is happening right now. I want to echo what Dr. Freeman said. We obviously didn't get to everybody's questions. Please feel free to reach out by email. You will also note that the 8 other board members have their emails listed on the Guilford Public Schools website. These individuals are also available to you. The only other thing I will note is that generally or typically in the summer months, in July and in August, the Board of Ed meets one time. We are now meeting almost every Monday. We are doing this because it is really important to stay on top of this reopening. Things are changing on a regular basis, as Dr. Freeman noted. Guidance from the state can change. It also provides, we hope, a forum for all of you to hear what's happening as the Guilford Public Schools administration grapples with all of these decisions, and how the Board of Ed is receiving this information, and how we're all working together again to try to plan best for this fall. So please note that you can expect a Board of Ed meeting for most, if not all, of the next Monday evenings. And we always welcome you to join. And certainly thank you for joining us tonight. Dr. Freeman, do you have any closing comment? I'll pass it on to you for the last word here.
Again, just thank you to everybody who was here. The plan is on the website. Please read the plan. I think that some of the questions, I was scrolling through some of the ones that we were unable to get to tonight. Many of them are addressed in the plan. Please read the document. Please continue to send your emails to Dr. Balistraci, to myself. And again, thank you so much. We would not be the school district we are without the community support. We've had over 100 participants all through this conversation. Thank you very much. We will continue to get communication out to you as we move through these last weeks of summer. Have a great night.